What is up, Internet? Welcome to Conversations. I'm Agustin Sanchez, founder of the Photographic Journal and host for this podcast. The TPJ team has been publishing interviews, photo essays, and features on the photographicjournal.com since 2011, featuring some of the most inspiring people we've been fortunate enough to meet. For our first conversation, we go back to where it all started. Dan Rubin's a globe-trotting landscape and portrait photographer who's worked with Mu, Jaguar, Huawei, Polaroid, and Lomography, just to name a few. I've known Dan for 15 years, first running into him at Refresh Miami, a local design meetup here in South Florida. He was instrumental in the initial build of TPJ, helping me put together our original site and consulting on the process and structure for interviews and initial art direction. The site's evolved and Dan has moved on to greener pastures, but he remains one of the family. We're very happy to join him in conversation today. Dan, how's it shaking, man?
It's a pleasure to be able to chat with you and help kick off this next chapter of TPJ.
Yeah, it's exciting. We've been wanting to do this for a while, and I think with this whole COVID-19 thing, it just felt very organic. You know, we're all stuck in our houses. I can actually get to people because they're in one spot.
I remember we talked early on about, so many things with TPJ and where it could go, but podcast was one of those items even back then. And I think the timing is so much better now, not because of what's going on right now, but back then podcasts were still, I think, a little bit niche. And now they're just like so many people understand what they are and know where to find them, and it's the right time, and even more so with everything that's going on in the world right this minute. So I'm happy that we can start this thing off together.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. I mean, the real struggle with it is, Lou and I would always chat, and because it's only audio, it's hard to talk about photography. You're talking about something that's very visual, and there might be a component to that where we put this out on YouTube or IGTV in a way that makes sense with visuals supported. But really, I'm thinking of these as being light conversations compared to our really in-depth interviews, in a way for us to just feature ideas or talk to people about what's going on in their lives.
I think it's a great idea, and it's going to make a great new aspect to what TPJ brings. I love reading long form interviews, but I also like listening to podcasts when I'm out on a run, right? I think there's a different kind of communication when you're having a conversation. You're actually able to listen into it and be that fly on the wall. And it's, I think everything's going to be really complimentary. So yeah, this is certainly going to be a season in the world coming up here where everyone has to communicate with each other this way. And I think especially because of that, it's just it's a little warmer way for us all to keep in touch, and for listeners to hear other voices literally, rather than just read their voice or see their voice in that way.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I think that everyone's talking about this, and it's probably a little cliche to go into too much of it. I'd rather actually catch up, get to know what you're doing and what your plans are. But it's something that's definitely on everyone's mind. I know that you're in Fort Lauderdale right now. Usually I have no idea where you are because you're always traveling somewhere new.
Well, yeah, there's no way to avoid really talking about what's going on. We don't have to focus on it, but at the same time, everyone in the world is going through it right now, and it's a marker for this point in time, and especially for folks like me who travel and do a lot of visual work when we travel. But I think for anyone who's stuck inside and is isolated and can't even, there are people in plenty of parts of the world now who can't even leave their homes. And if you're the kind of person who always has a camera in your hand, is always looking to document, is always chasing the light, or doing portraits and meeting up with people, or working events, or any of that stuff, this is a very, very strange time. So as you said, I'm usually somewhere else in the world. I've been based in the UK. I realized like this summer like this past December, January, I guess, was 10 years since I started living overseas when I was going back and forth. And this summer will be 7 years since I moved away from Florida full time. And even then, most of my time is spent in different places. So it's very, very strange to be not just stuck in one place, but kind of in one place, in a place where I don't live at all and haven't lived in more than half a decade. And coming to terms with that is my version of of what everyone is going through, kind of coming to terms with just being isolated and not being able to do the things they normally do, whatever that happens to be. So I see it though as a real interesting challenge. Like there's so much potential for what can come out of this new and developing constraint, and creatives of all forms are nothing if not resourceful when it comes to working within constraints. So I'm trying to see it with all the challenges that have come up for me personally and professionally because of this. I'm still trying to see it as much as possible as an opportunity more than anything else, and we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, no, I mean it's definitely. I feel like it's going to be a catalyst for a lot of ideas. You have people that are isolated, stuck in their own heads. They're anxious about things. They're trying to cope and probably want distraction. And there's only so much Netflix that you can watch before you're really just, a dude sitting on a couch. I see on your Instagram that you're looking to start an IGTV talk show.
Well, it's one of the ideas that has come out of this. So for me, the effects of all this actually go back further than I think they do for at least people in the U.S. and the U.K. because both countries, where I kind of spend most of my time when I'm not elsewhere, have been kind of late to react, but also late to see the effects of the coronavirus. So, but with all my traveling, I tend to keep up to date on things that are happening all over the world. I've gotten used to that over the years, just because I never quite know where I'm going to be in 2-3 months or 6 months, and I've become dialed into what's happening because of that, but also just like appreciating a larger awareness because of having traveled so much in the last decade, that I feel like I want to know what's going on everywhere. And I check in with the world news and a couple of different news sources and medical and scientific friends and news as well, just to kind of be involved. And since January, I was really, really interested in what was happening with this in China, because I was in the process, January and February, I was neck deep in planning a handful of travel-related events. One was a travel workshop, a location-based workshop for 4x5 film photography and developing and scanning, and that was going to be in Sardinia in Italy at the beginning of May. And no cases had shown up in Italy yet at that point. It hadn't really spread outside of China in early January, but because I was starting to plan travel-related stuff, I was kind of dialed in a little bit more. And so by the time we launched that, my friend Jahan and I, in kind of mid-February, along with another trip, a photography tour in Russia, which at the moment is not officially canceled, but it's scheduled for the beginning of June. And honestly, I don't see any way that we'll be able to move that along. So it'll end up being kind of, I think, the last thing that I have to cancel of all of the things that were planned into the spring and summer. But because of those two big projects and spending 2 months on them, by the time I was here, which is only, let's say, 10, 11 days ago, that I decided I was going to stay. I changed my flight to London because I knew the conference was off in Iceland and the photography show in Birmingham in the UK. So I said, okay, let me just push the flight by a month. I'll stay with family and just see how things are going to go. And at that point, I was already thinking, well, everything I've planned for my time, but also most of my income for the next 6 months is being canceled. I've got to come up with other ideas. So that first week, I was just kind of brainstorming all sorts of things, like what can I do when I don't have my gear, I don't have at my workspace. I'm not going to be doing shoots. I'm not, what kind of stuff can I do? And I love teaching. I love sharing. I love trying to shine a light on other people. I mean, that's why the idea of the Photographic Journal in the first place was so exciting, because it's like, we both loved the idea of doing something that wasn't about us. It was about other people and totally. Other people's stories. And I always get most excited about stuff like that. And so I just thought, well, I've never done anything on YouTube for various reasons, just mostly time and wanting things to have high production value and not feeling like I could do what I wanted to do. And IGTV has always sat there as a thing that I was really curious about, and just watching how other people used it, but never could figure out where I might fit in it, especially with like Instagram stories being this like easy thing for me to do a lot on, because it's ephemeral and it just disappears, and it doesn't matter as much. And I was trying to figure out for a long time, for a couple of years, like how I could do something that kind of sat between the production values I would like to have on YouTube and the lack of production values that an Instagram story needs to have to still kind of just be its thing. And this thing came up, and I thought, what, everyone's going to be isolated within a few weeks. Why not use this as a chance to do something, again, like kind of like a podcast, right, but different. Something that would be kind of like an Instagram Live, but not an Instagram Live. And a lot of people have been doing some really great Instagram Lives daily, tons of people across all industries, as well as like shared Zoom calls and streamed public YouTube things. There's been so much, right, in the last couple of weeks. It's been amazing, I think. Yeah. And my idea for having a talk show is just that it's just a slightly different format. It's kind of like the Apple event series that I did 4, 5, 6 years ago, I guess. It's like 6 years ago now in London with Apple, and bringing a guest on, having something that's a little bit more like a late night talk show, maybe having 1 or 2 guests, being able to edit them in, and just having the really, really lo-fi recording quality, but not having to worry about it being live, being able to like cut the way you would on a podcast, and maybe have a musical guest or something else that's, not make it just about one thing, make it about just anything creative, and as a way to also kind of get a few freelancers who I know who are similarly out of work doing something, and maybe being able to get a sponsor or figure out some way to get it funded by Patreon or something like that. So I'm in the process of working on that and a bunch of other ideas. And to be honest, it's this is going back to what I said about this being this wonderful breeding ground for creativity. I don't think I've had a 2-week span in my life where I've had so many ideas.
That's interesting.
And it's kind of necessity. Like I literally, my entire up until this week, I still had 2 things on my list for the spring and the summer that hadn't been canceled or postponed. Right. Because the photography show wasn't canceled; it was postponed to September, and we'll see if everything's cleared up for it to run by then. I hope so. But I also had a pair of jeans that I've been collaborating with a company in Wales, Hyatt Denim, on for it's about 2.5 years, slowly collaborating on this with them, and we were set to launch at the end of April. 2 days ago, I think they had to close their factory, and they don't know when they'll be able to reopen. So that was one of the last 2 things that was like, okay, well, that's one last thing of income and project-related work that is at least postponed. I was going to be launching camera straps as well, which is a small product, but still something to add to that long tail of products and offerings. Those are going to launch in April or May, but we've had to postpone them as well because of various elements that need to be coordinated, and shoots that need to be done, and product samples that need to be sent out, and items that need to be shipped in from China because they're parts that we need that we can't get because they're all delayed. It's the knock-on effect has been kind of incredible to see. And then today I got the final bit of notice for the last thing that was hanging over my calendar as potential, and it's another thing that's been postponed. I put in an application in February for the Catchlight Fellowship. It's based out of San Francisco, toward this Arctic Circle documentary project that I've been slowly working on for the last 3 or 4 years. And again, they've just postponed their entire application process, which is great. It's not a no, but if they said yes and I got the grant, I wouldn't be able to produce anything right now anyway, so it's smart that they've pushed it back. But it now means that my calendar is completely officially clear. There's nothing, and that's both freeing and wonderful, and also terrifying because all the income is gone, and this is the same thing a lot of freelancers are facing right now. Without a backup plan, because all months have been spent on all of these plans to not need any backup plan. And you always have contingencies, but you have a contingency for like, well, what if one thing goes wrong, or what if two things go wrong? Not what if everything is just scrubbed. So I'm kind of going, all right, well, I can pay the various bills that I have until probably the end of April, and between now and then, I got to get some stuff happening, and some of that is for just my own brain, and things that'll help other people will excite me more, and I'll throw myself at them. But I've also got to make some money. So that necessity of like having to come up with solutions to this problem, I think it's just a great thing for an active brain. I know it's also, I'm saying that in a very positive way, and that's not to say at all that I haven't also been like horribly sleep deprived and depressed and anxious these last 2 weeks. I have, but I think all these things can live together and in the same place, and it's a great way to face down the anxiety of something that's completely out of your control by doing things. Like last night, I had this 5-hour virtual meeting with a friend of mine in Wales, who's also a designer, super talented woman, and we'd had a quick catch up on Sunday just to say, hey, how are you in isolation? How are you doing? What's happening with your work? Oh, everything's kind of ending all at once, and we agreed to take a few days to think about some ideas and come back and just compare notes and see, hey, are there any things that we could at least just work on together to pass the time, to add some things to our portfolio, to put some things out into the world, or whatever it was. And it turned into a 5-hour brainstorming session where we came out of it with 4 amazing ideas that are all completely different, that we're both super stoked to work on. And that's only one of the calls that I've had in the last week and a half about various things, including that IGTV talk show. So now I'm in this situation where, like we said at the top of the call, I'm good at starting things. I can get super passionate about loads of ideas, and the trick now is being able to figure out which ones are actually worth investing the time into, which ones are likely to actually happen, and not to take on too many things all out of the excitement. But I gotta say, like, I've gone from 2.5 weeks ago, having a full schedule, to a few days later having everything canceled, to now having too many projects in idea form that most of which will have the potential to get a lot of people involved, a lot of other freelancers, which is what I hope. I hope that I can come up with some ideas to get other people who are feeling stuck and maybe don't have an idea of how to get themselves out yet. I want to do whatever I can to help.
So you're really looking at this whole downtime as kind of a way to prime next steps, see where you want to go, come up with really great ideas, and then get appropriate people involved that you think can really help you see it through.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is that, like I mentioned, the Arctic Circle documentary I've been working on. I've been slowly working on this idea that keeps getting bigger and bigger every year it's just over 4 years now since I came up with it in its infantile original form. And the learning that I've done each year between fundraising and looking for sponsors and learning about all of the sources of funding, private and public, and that are available for projects like that, as well as learning what kind of team I need for something that is as complicated as it is. It's not super complicated, but it's a team-based project, because this thing is, and I love talking about it. It's not something I've ever kept secret, but the idea is I'm doing a documentary on creatives who live and work in the Arctic Circle, and it's going to be focused on a group of creatives and artists across as many different media and genres as possible, as practical, in Norway, Russia, and North America. So we get like this interesting mixture of the similarities between those three completely different cultures and countries, but because they're all in the same place, what are the things that are similar because of where they're located on the planet, and what are the things that are different because their cultures are so different? And
this is the one where you originally were going to shoot portraits at midnight, but because it was so far up into the Arctic Circle, it's daytime.
Yeah, and that's where the project started. Right. It was just going to be a portrait project. I wanted to shoot. Originally, I was just going to shoot in the midnight sun, and I was only going to shoot these portraits between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. So they were in that kind of midnight window, and I was just going to do it in Scandinavian countries to begin with. They were just going to be portraits, but I was going to do them on 4x5 film and on digital. And it was that original concept was kind of a way to make the exhibition and the book from it a little bit more interesting than just the portraits and the interviews that would go along with it. And that alone was an interesting project to me, and it was just going to be in the summer, and that was fine. That first year, I learned a lot about how complicated it would be to just get the funding for just me and an assistant and maybe one other person to do behind the scenes footage that I could use for other information, other output. And it nearly happened. It came very, very close. Sony was interested in helping sponsor it, and there was some good momentum, but it didn't quite happen for a load of personal reasons. That was the year my dad passed away, and a bunch of other things kind of happened all at once. So I kind of went, all right, you know what? It's no problem. No one else is doing this. No one else has done it in the past. I'll push it a year and I'll try again. In that next year, and this is one of the things that's wonderful about downtime and about not rushing, which I think is very applicable to everyone, especially right now, but even outside of this whole COVID-19 thing. Because I kind of let it go for that year, I only had a 6 or 8 week window that I could do the entire project in. So I had to just go, all right, well, it'll be 2017. And then I had lots of time to think about it, but also do more research and also talk to people about the idea. And the more open I was with people about the idea, the more I got questions about it that I hadn't considered. I got ideas that I hadn't considered. And very quickly, it became obvious that I couldn't just do a photo project, that this was interesting enough to a lot of people that it needed to also, the whole thing needed to be filmed, and I needed to make it a documentary to get these interviews and get these artists on film, not just on stills. And
so your team went from 3 people to 8?
Basically, so then I had to, start talking to producers and start talking to film production companies and learning about a different scale again of fundraising. And that's happened in cycles every year. So 2017, it didn't happen, but for other reasons that were all funding related. But it was fine by that point because I went, no problem, it's going to be even better next year. And now I have even more time to work on the funding. And at that point, I'd also decided that it was going to be not just the Midnight Sun, but I was also going to do a companion mirror book that would be during polar night. So I would go back and visit the same people and take portraits using incandescent light when there's no sunlight at all, just using whatever available light there is, and shoot these portraits and continue to film and do follow-up interviews with the exact same people in these locations. And that just suddenly made it feel like a complete thing, both in terms of the portrait and interview side of it, and the books and the exhibition, and then also the documentary.
You want to start seeing a white book that says midnight and a dark book that says midday.
Pretty much. Yeah. And and that's exactly what it would be. It's a natural. I don't mind that it's very obvious because no one's done it before.
No, it's beautiful.
And it just works. And so coming back to things like these ideas that I've been working on the last couple of weeks, a lot of the stuff that I've learned just trying to make this documentary happen has taught me a ton about what's needed to produce things like television, even live TV or documentaries or even narrative films. And I've had so many good conversations with film production teams and directors and cinematographers and editors and producers and even sound people, sound engineers. And so now I have I have a network. I have a network of people who are all freelancers for the most part and are probably going to be in need of work in the same way that a lot of us are right now. And so that's where my brain has now in the last couple of weeks been going to not things like, what can I do? I've been doing that as well. I ordered a full kit of black and white and color film developing materials, which I've been meaning to do later this year anyway. But I figure, well, I'm stuck. I don't know how long I'll be stuck here. Let me use this time to practice my developing and get that started. So I've got a couple of things that are just to occupy my own time. But the bigger things that I'm interested in are how can I help myself and a lot of other people at the same time. So things like a TV series where all I'll need is a producer and an editor to start. But that's a 3-person team then, that if I go to a sponsor, I can say, yeah, no, this isn't just for me. This is also going to be these other people. And not just that, but every guest that I have on, everyone who's a contributor to this, I also want to pay them because they're all going to be freelancers as well and all suffering here. So this isn't just me trying to line my pockets. This is me trying to make it easy for a sponsor to have me as a single point of access, as a single vendor, but know that will get distributed to a bunch of people who need it right now. And that it makes me happy, and I get to use this information that I've been just gathering for another project that's going to be pushed back a year at least. Right. I get to use that for something new. I mean, it's interesting. You are very good at being a connector and a facilitator. You're someone that I think one of your main talents, aside from your aesthetic eye, obviously, is the amount of attention that you can put on to what's in front of you without distraction. I meet up with so many people who are in from town, and you're catching up with them, but they're constantly looking at their phone. They've got something else going on. They, need to leave by 2 because they're meeting another friend. Whenever you and I hang out, it's like nothing else exists. And you have that power with whatever's kind of in front of you, because I've seen it at work in other projects with TPJ, with, the Great Discontent, or other things that you've sort of been involved with, where when you're involved with those things, your time is precious and you're really focused. So Dan, in all of this, getting away from some of the COVID-19 and your everyday for what you're doing right now, I want to take a step back. This is called the Photographic Journal. We've been talking a lot about, projects and process, which I think is super interesting. But in the way that you've been able to develop a lot of ideas, let's talk about what your typical outside of the COVID-19 thing. What do your days actually look like? How are you engaging with brands and working with them? And how are you sort of coming up with ideas and pitching them to them? Well, so in some ways it's not that different, just a bit more spread out, not quite as manic as things have been in the last couple of weeks. But, I'm still doing a mixture of different types of projects with including photography, but also, teaching photography, right. Either workshops or speaking at conferences about it, or running online workshops, or we're working on collaborative projects with various brands and other creators that ends up being more design, even though it involves photography in some way, or the projects are focused on the photography audience, or I'm working with labs or with film companies. So there's this wonderful mixture for me, having a design background and still being a designer, but not really publicly being a designer right. as much. And so that means that every day ends up being quite different. Every week ends up being quite different. And what I've been doing the last few years, I guess all told, 3.5 out of the last 4.5 years, maybe, I've been living nomadically, still based in the UK and based in London professionally, going back there mostly between trips elsewhere, but trying something different and seeing what that lifestyle would enable, both with my photography, because I love going to a new place. I love being in different places and being able to say, oh, the light's going to be great this time of year. I really want to see some snow, so where can I go for that? And it's something you can't do as easily when you're also paying rent at the same time, but just not using the place. And so after 3 years of living in the UK and being in one place and doing a lot of travel, but having it mostly be just by request, brands would hire me to do photography in a certain location or tied to a certain event or promotion, and I would go, and I would happily do that. But the rest of the time, I wasn't really traveling for myself and producing my own projects or kind of trying to explore places that I wanted to go rather than just where someone was asking me. So I decided to flip that on its head, and that's turned into this wonderful enabler of exploration, and just, I guess it's allowed me to pull on any thread that's interesting to me, whether that's a location or meeting someone virtually who I'd really love to do a portrait session with, but they can't travel to London for wherever they are, and I just go, well, let's see if I can be where you are in the next couple of months. Right. I just off the back of that, as just a single example, I connected with a dancer and choreographer and movement director, Katie James from Scotland, a couple of years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, found her work through someone else on Instagram. Loved what she was doing with motion, and she also had been working with some photographers, but I just thought I wanted to be doing more and more and more portrait work, but I didn't want to be working with only models.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm really fascinated by people who can become someone or something else on stage. So I've got this list of dancers and choreographers and people who do movement and actors as well. So people who are comfortable being in front of a camera, but what they do in front of the camera is going to be a totally different thing than a model, and directing them and working with them is going to be totally different. And
so you find that kind of collaboration more inspiring than working with somebody that has 30 poses that they know look good, and then every photograph looks the same, basically.
Well, yeah, and that's certainly not to say anything negative about models, because there are some. I've worked with a good amount of models of various levels of experience over the last 3 or 4 years since I've really been trying to push a portrait work in my personal portfolio and figure out what type I would like to do and how I can make it work that is my own rather than something that's heavily influenced by other stuff I've seen. And that's a tough thing to do for any type of art, right? But that's been the one of the main challenges I've given myself these last 3 years. And whenever I work with models, I end up with good results, but the process of directing them, because I'm not used to directing people, it ends up requiring a lot more to pull something out of them. So they're either going to where their default is, or it takes a good amount of work for me to figure out how to get what I want, but I'm not seeing out of them. And what I found working with musicians and actors and dancers and choreographers is that they already do their thing. They have their art that is completely opinionated. They don't need to be told by anyone what to do. So when we come together and start to plan something, right from the beginning, it's very collaborative. It's instantly, they have an opinion, and that opinion for me is just like working with the designer as an art director or creative director. I want their input. I'm not trying to tell them what to do. I want to hear what they think the direction should be, and then together we just play tennis until you come up with the thing that you both are excited about. And
right. It's not that you don't have an idea. You do have an idea, but you're riffing off of somebody to make the idea greater.
Well, and part of that is that some photographers I know are great at it. They can show up, and whether it's a model or someone who's never been in front of a camera before, they can get magic out of them. I don't think that I
know people like that are on the TPJ staff.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, exactly, right. And I'm always in awe of those people, and I've tried that, and it doesn't feel natural to me. So my entire life, I've been led, or I've allowed myself to be led by my gut. And if something doesn't feel like the direction I should be going, it doesn't feel like the right fit for me, I don't really push too hard on it, because I just feel like that can be a waste of time. Like, yeah, I could get really good at that, but how many years is it going to take me? Whereas if I go over here, like I could get something that is a much better fit, and then those same years will put me much further ahead than they would if I were like trying to bang down this other door.
I mean, it's interesting because, okay, so you and I have known each other for, I think it's 15 years, which is insane to me.
That is nuts. Well, we are.
It's aging us, but
getting a bit older.
Yeah, we are. Oh my God! But what's interesting is, I took you out on a portrait, like photo day, and you were extremely uncomfortable. I remember because at the time you were mainly doing cityscapes and landscapes. So when the person got in there, you were like, I remember like there was one point where you were just like, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, just do what you do, but put the person, you know, either on thirds or in the center or something that sort of draws your eye in. I've seen your film. I know the way that you sort of attack an idea from different angles. You do the same thing with design that you do with photography, where you're working in your head some sort of ratio or look that you want to try, and you're constantly just playing with stuff, and that sort of appealed to you, and I got like something kind of working. But what you're saying makes sense. You're coping with the fact that you're not completely comfortable with taking portraits, so you're finding what works for you.
Well, and it's the thing for me that I've realized, and I didn't know what it was before, because I'd shot portraits like going back 6, 7, 8 years. I'd like shot portraits with some friends and girlfriends, and those were a whole lot easier, but there was already a line of communication with the subject. And that's what I like having a back and forth. I like having a relationship with whoever I'm working with on any creative project, whether it's music or design or photography. And I was just not, I couldn't figure out what that relationship, where that relationship needed to start with someone I didn't know and did like, yeah, and had just met and then was trying to work with. And I've experimented with that in different ways. Like I've had like that experience you just mentioned, where I got like a handful of really good photos out of that day, but I hadn't met her before, and it was just like starting completely from scratch. And I didn't know how to calibrate. And then I've tried meeting up with someone ahead of time and having like a bunch of backs and forths before we even like get to the shoot, and that works better. Mm-hmm. But it still has usually felt.
It's subjective to how you interact with that person. You can go for coffee and maybe you hit it off and the photos are amazing. But there's other times where you meet up with somebody and then you actually want to shoot them less.
Yeah,
just to be honest.
And I don't get the best work out of myself that way. And what I started to, I think with everything, it takes a while to figure out what your relationship is with a thing that you really want to do. It takes almost no time for you to figure out your relationship with something you don't want to do, because you just go, nah, I don't want to do this, and you stop doing it. But if it's something you really want to do, but you haven't found your way through it yet, it takes time. And the length of time is completely arbitrary and differs by person and thing. So you just have to kind of stick with it, but keep trying different things, different angles. And what I realized was that I started looking at the portrait work that I'd done after having a good number of years doing it. And I was looking at the other type of photography that I took to way more easily. And I was trying to find the overlap in my approach. Mm-hmm. And there's not much of a relationship between landscape work or street work, anything where you're photographing inanimate things, or even product work and brand work, and portraits, because you don't have to build a relationship in the same way with the thing. It's just there. So you need to get to know it in your own way, but you have your time. You can be just solely in your head about it, which you can't with a subject. And what I realized was that there was this category of documentary work and kind of the stuff that's on the verge of reportage while not actually being a photojournalist, at least yet. It's something that I've always been fascinated by. It's why I like the idea of documentary filmmaking as well. I love even in my personal work, when I'm not trying to make a project, I like capturing little tiny moments that are just things that happen in life as life goes along. And what I realized was that there's an overlap there of me being very interested in the subject matter. And I thought, okay, that's something. It's the story. It's like, if there's a story I'm really interested in, I can connect with it. If I'm just meeting up with a model to do a test because I reached out to the agency and they sent me a list and I picked a few that looked like they were attractive and I'd like to shoot someone like that and have them in my portfolio, there's still no story there. And until you meet them, you don't know what their story is. And then sometimes it's interesting, sometimes it's not. And that's what I found I was connecting with more than the way they looked and the way they were in front of the camera. Was if they had an interesting story, if that person was interesting, I could be interested in them. And once I was interested in them, I could take a good portrait. And that's where I started to pivot. I said, okay, well, maybe models aren't the people I need to be photographing. Maybe I need to be photographing people who I'm naturally interested in. And so it actually started with a musician that I photographed 3 years ago now. Yeah, wow, time is a thing. She's a friend as well, and a wonderful, talented musician and songwriter, Emily Denton. And we met in London, again, kind of met on Instagram. She was a fan of my work, which I didn't know until I reached out to her, because I'd been following her music. I'd found her music through someone else. And I saw her mention something about just wanting to practice being in front of the camera more, for that side of her art as a musician. She just, she needs to be comfortable, on stage and in front of a camera. And I reached out to her and I said, hey, let's do a shoot. She said, oh my God, I love your photography. And I went, okay, this is cool. I already like your music. Let's just chat. And it instantly led to good things. And we did this wonderful first shoot, which was supposed to be for her first single release. And so many of those photos, there were so few images from a 2 or 3 hour shoot that I would throw away. There were just too many good ones. Mm-hmm. And I knew from that point that was the kind of relationship I needed to start with. If that was the starting point, anything that came after it would be good product, good work. And that just kind of led me to start looking at, I've still shot with some models and done some tests and got some really good images out of them in the last few years since then, but my better work has come from working with actors and dancers and and musicians, people who have a thing, have a story that I can connect with. And I think ultimately that's what we all need, regardless of what our medium is. We need to be able to connect with the subject matter, and whether it's personal to us or it's something that just fascinates us about another topic or another person. And when we do that, we make better work.
I mean, look, I think that falls into the 10,000 hours to become really good at something. When we first started taking photos, getting something in focus, getting something properly lit, that was your focus. And then it was framing, and then it was interacting with somebody. Once you get to a point where all of that becomes second nature and you are, and I by no means am at probably that 10,000 hours, but I'm farther along than some. And I think that as you get there, really talking about or thinking about what you want to say with your visual medium, what aspects of the visual medium you're trying to communicate with, that makes much more sense. Of course there are people that are very happy because they have a strong sense of aesthetic and what they're trying to show, that anyone is a blank canvas, right? If you can, there's some photographers where you can throw anyone into their frame and it's going to be beautiful. For something like an honest portrait, something like reportage, something that you're talking about, that genuine interest needs to be there, because this goes back to something that I always talk about, that a good portrait is more of a reflection of the photographer than it is necessarily the person you're shooting. It's your 100%. Love letter to your interest in that person, the connection you have with them, and when you decide to to actuate that shutter.
I can't remember. That reminds me of a quote that I've read years and years ago, and I cannot for the life of me right now remember who said this, but it was a photographer. It was a portrait photographer. It'll be easy to find this quote, but it was words to the effect of them having to fall in love with everyone they took a picture of. Like that was just, that was how they found their connection, that they were able to get something really passionate and really natural and really honest out of that person because they genuinely loved that person. So again, that portrait is a reflection of that love of the photographer, that emotion from the photographer. And you can see the same in everyone's work, that whether if it's documentary work, what you're seeing is the passion of the person behind the camera.
But it's what you see in your landscape work.
And well, that's the thing. It doesn't matter what the subject matter is. When it's good, you can't have an artist behind the camera that's dispassionate about it. That literally doesn't happen. You don't have someone who's a photographer who makes amazing work of any subject matter and doesn't give a shit about what that work is.
Yep.
And I think that kind of gets downplayed a little bit because, especially in photography, more so in design, as you well know, we focus on tools in design because everyone talks about it. But at some point, you learn the tool and you just get on with it. It doesn't matter what the tool is. It matters like what you're doing with it. Yeah. Photographers, we cannot get away from geeking out about the equipment and the gear and the settings and the aperture and it's like,
it's funny.
It's like DIY dads, right?
Yeah, but
like,
how often do you and I talk about gear?
Well, we don't all that often.
I don't with Lou. I talk to Lou every day, and he and I are talking about photography, but we're hardly talking about gear. I haven't bought a new camera in, I want to say, like 6 or 7 years.
Which is an amazing feat, and you should win some sort of photography award just for avoiding
dad.
That. But when I say we, I of course mean the general we. But I'm also honest that like I can, if I'm chatting with a photographer who wants to chat about gear, I flip into that mode so easily, and I geek out over it. But I think just more broadly, if you look at what the photography world talks about and what the articles that get published about photography are talking about, they're not talking about process, they're not talking about methodology, they're not talking about theory, they're not talking about communication or passion. They're talking about stuff.
But that's where TPJ came in. I mean, that honestly is what was the conceit was, hey, that person does really good work. I want to know why they do it. I want to know. I don't want to know the how. I can figure that out. Any of us can look at a photo and go, okay, they're using this camera. It's medium format. It's 120 millimeters. You can kind of tell by the compression. That stuff we all know we can figure out. You can look at framing and emulate something, but knowing why someone took a photo, what they were trying to communicate, what was alluring to them, that's, to me, that's the meat and potatoes of what we're after. It's what this, conversation series is about.
Well, I think it's something that the photography world specifically needs more of, and TPJ now is this massive back catalog of that, right? And even more of it's going to come out of this format, out of the conversation. And thankfully, there are others. I don't know if you're familiar with The Observers, but it's another great publication, right? And if you look around you can't find a lot of people who are trying to expose these stories. They still don't happen in great volume. And the more that we can all steer the conversation that way, I think the more everyone learns about what actually makes the work important. Because at the end of the day, we might still look at a photo book and fawn over the work and love the work, and in our heads go, oh man, I wonder what settings he was using, or I wonder what film that woman was shooting with. But ultimately, we know that's not what makes us connect with the work. So the more that conversation becomes about that and continues to be about that, then I think the better everyone's work will become.
Yeah, it's like Craig Modd's field test with the Leica Q, right? There's this beautiful page that if you just Google Leica Q, Craig's site will come up, and it's not talking about the specs of what a Leica Q is. It's talking about his experience with that tool as something that he's capturing. And, you know, what's beautiful about it is all of the photos and what he did with the tool, less so about, oh, it's got this size sensor and it uses this. It's like, we all know that stuff. Like that's cool. But showing how the tool can yield beautiful results and the process that got there is far more interesting than a spec sheet. So, you know, hopefully I never want to be that spec sheet. I want us to always be kind of looking behind the curtain, looking for the mad scientist that's creating something. And that's most of what intrigues me just as a person, I think, overall.
Well, now you mentioned Craig, and that's a great opportunity for me to pivot the conversation and also ask you a question to set us off in a different direction. Craig and I, we've known each other for a little over 10 years in person and a few years more than that virtually. And you mentioned the Leica Q specifically, and Craig and I actually produced a book together, right. A photo book together, which was my first time using a Leica Q as well, which was also kind of wild. But that overlap is photo books, which is I think a wonderful thing for designers as well, who are photographers, because for us, we look at the book and we see it in an additional dimension from just the photo book, the artifact itself. Right. What are your feelings about the role of the photo book, the tangible artifact, especially now as we enter into this indeterminate length of isolation and lack of tangible connection? Do you feel like it's maybe poised to make an even bigger impact than it always has?
So that's really interesting. I mean, I think that in a world where, and I see this across multiple mediums, right? Like, I am a guitarist, and the idea of digital modeling a analog amp has gotten better and better and better. And digital modeling of an analog process for taking film has got better and better and better. The iPad is amazing. You know, you can look at the photographicjournal.com and look at the layout that we've put together, and it looks gorgeous. But because you're designing a responsive thing across multiple devices, there's concessions that are made. Whereas being able to design something at a specific size to be enjoyed large format on beautiful paper with a certain smell, with a certain touch, with a certain sheen that you chose to show off that photography feels like the ultimate way to look at and read about whatever subject, honestly, you're interested in. You don't know this because I haven't shared it with you, but I've actually been working on layouts for a Photographic Journal quarterly that we're looking to put out later this year, maybe early next year now with COVID. I'll send you some layouts later. They look good. I'm happy with some of the tests that I've been able to do using content from the site, but adapted to a print layout. That being said, I think that the role of print media is extremely important, and it's something that I think digital mediums strive for the feel of the analog thing they're trying to represent.
And that's always been the interesting struggle for designers, I think, with the web, and more with the web than with any other type of technology, because if you're designing apps especially for touchscreens, you still have some kind of more fixed constraint. You don't have to worry completely about fluidity in the same way as you might for designing a responsive website. And so you're making concessions, but there are fewer concessions, and they're concessions for screen sizes that you just know and you can predict, and orientations you can predict. And even with designers that I see who are just digital natives, they haven't learned how to design for print. Their environment from the get-go has been digital and the web. There's still this weird anchor around their mentality and their approach, that because I think we all grow up in a tangible world, so we are inherently tied to wanting the things that we make digitally to be as close to the brilliance of touching things as they can be. Right. And I feel like now the pendulum has swung where 15, 20 years ago, the majority of designers with experience hadn't done anything digitally. And there was this, issue because of that, of people transferring their skills or being scared of it and having to learn how to port all this knowledge over. And now we've gone to the other end where all these people who are fantastic designers, fantastic creatives with lots of skill haven't gone the other direction. Right. And I wonder, I've been thinking about this a lot in the last week or so. It struck me that if this world of isolation, for instance, goes on for 9, 12, 18 months, which is kind of the long-term potential that some of the scientists and medical community are floating, which is unimaginable at this point, right? But if it happened to be that way, we're gonna have a majority of the entire world's population will be in need of as much tangible experience of their life as possible, because our entire life and interaction will be shifted to digital, to voice or video chats, to emails, to Slack. And I started thinking, what kind of industries could thrive in that kind of environment that aren't digital? Because we assume that the digital industries are going to thrive. But what tangible objects are people really going to connect with? People can't go to galleries, they can't go to museums. That's what books kind of has always been to me, especially with photo books. It's an exhibition that you can hold, that you can put on a shelf, and more than that, it's even more control, I've always thought, for photographers than an exhibition, because you can't really force people in most galleries to look at work in a particular order and a particular way. You can try, and good curators can do this, and good photographers can work with them to produce a really nice effect out of a gallery space. But with a book, people can flip to whatever page they want, but you've laid it out in a way that is fixed, and they can't change the way you've ordered it. So people can interact with it in their own way, but they can definitely kind of appreciate the pacing and the flow. And there's this idea in my head that I think this might be this moment for all these photographers so many photographers I meet are they have it in their head to do exhibitions. Like, that's their goal, much more than photo books. Even though photo books are still a very popular thing, people want to exhibit because that's kind of the thing, to have an opening and to have people come and see your work large and hanging on the wall. But what if we end up seeing this kind of almost renaissance of the photo book in a way that the world maybe hasn't even seen before? Because there are printers around the world you can run an HP Indigo digital press with one person. Right. Paper manufacturers don't need many people at all to operate, probably fewer than a whiskey distillery. So there's a really good chance that the production chain needed for photo books, just like with prints, right? Photo prints are also going to be something that I think we might see more people want to interact with. The downside there is that we only have so much wall space. So I've always loved photo books, and it's especially fun for me as a designer to think ahead and to plan projects. I've got at least a half dozen projects that are kind of 3 to 5 year projects in my head that are photographic projects, but specifically because I can see them ending up in a book, and I know what the book titles are going to be before I've even taken a single shot. And I love the idea of designing the book, and it's something I can't wait for your first book.
Well, I actually just emailed you a preview of some of the layouts that I've been playing with.
Brilliant. I love it. Well, and I love that this has inadvertently become perhaps an announcement to the TPJ community of a pending quarterly.
Yeah, it'll happen at some point. It really will.
It.
I'm going to make sure it does. The best analog that I can find for this is, we used to listen to long play albums and actually listen to an entire body of collected songs as one piece. You would listen to, Zeppelin 2 as an album. Then we got to the 80s, and it was easy to fast forward. You had, tapes, and there was more of the idea of like MTV, so there was more singles that were coming out. You listened to albums less, but you still listened to an album, right? CDs came out, and then we moved to now like Spotify. I do have favorite albums that have come out, obviously, but for the most part, I take the songs that are the ones that I most listen to and put them as part of a mix, and then listen to a certain genre. I'm not looking at a whole work together. And on the music end, what is their photo book? Is it short films? Is it going to the concert? There's a way where you're putting together that playlist of your work to move people. And they say a photo is worth 1,000 words, but putting together a compendium of your work around a particular topic or idea is always more interesting, because then you get multiple thousands of words, right?
Totally. I think especially for photographers listening to this and wondering what they're going to do while they're sitting around and they can't make new work. And everyone is starting to dig through their archives and share more on Instagram and Tumblr and Twitter and everywhere else. But I would challenge anyone who, especially if you haven't considered making a photo book before, look at your archive through that particular lens. Start looking at it as a curator and trying to find the stories, the threads. What you'll probably find, especially if you've been shooting for years, is that you've actually got enough material for a number of books, a number of different topics. And that's something that you can be making, and not just making, but especially in these times where we're not sure exactly where the income's going to come from for a lot of photographers specifically. Books are something that people are more likely to want to buy, to consume, because it's a thing that they can interact with more than prints. Again, photographers, I sell prints, right? But I don't expect a single person to ever order more than one, because if they're like, how much wall space do people have? Again, but people have shelf space, and people are really going to want to see more things that show them a different part of the world. And if you're listening from somewhere in India or Egypt or Japan or Iceland or the US or Australia, you can produce a book that someone who's isolated in another part of the world, who has never seen your part of the world and the way that you see it, and you can show it to them in a way that they would never be able to experience on a smartphone or on a tablet or even in a single print. And it's not only a thing that you can use as something to occupy your time. It's not only something you can use to maybe generate some income, but it's also something I think that could end up over the next handful of months bringing even more joy to people during this than it would ever have been possible to bring before something like this.
Yeah, I completely
And that's
agree.
Pretty special.
And honestly, man, I can't think of a better way to end this than with that thought. Why don't you go ahead and tell people where they can find you, put any plugs you want in terms of where you want to direct any of the audience that's listening.
Well, for now, since I have no upcoming events at the minute, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Dan Rubin, and I'm going to be putting a lot of ideas out into the world through both of those platforms. They're both fantastic for photographers. Obviously, we know Instagram is, but Twitter has been investing so much in the quality of their images lately that it's turned it into a thriving community over the last few years. And I'm going to be pushing tons of things out there as soon as I can get projects together. If you're interested in paying attention, just follow me on those, and you'll see what I'm doing.
Yeah. So Dan Rubin at DanRubin, and then you can follow me at on Instagram at Augie, AUGI_Sanchez. And yeah, if you're a photographer that's interested in books and printed, drop us a line. Our door's open. If you're interested in publishing books and don't know how to do it, we can point you in the right direction.
Well, Augie, thanks so much for inviting me to help you start this off. This has been a wonderful chat that we could have just done without recording it.
For sure.
And I'm so glad that we were able to do this in a way that we could share with people. And thanks again for making me part of it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining and taking a little bit of time out of the anxiety-filled air with me. We'll chat soon. Probably catch up just off podcast.
Definitely.
Cool. We'll talk soon, man.